And Norm, take it away.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Phil Kearny uh, first meeting of the year, 2026. We're glad to have Stan. Is it Prager?
Prager.
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 Stan Prager with us tonight. He's an independent public historian, and his work focuses on the intersection of history and technology. He holds a Master of Arts in History with a concentration in public history, and he has spent decades leading a computer services and technology firm. He spearheaded multiple digital archiving projects. He's presented on digital history at a history camp, and he serves as an on-air technology consultant for a regional television station. So his work emphasizes preserving and sharing the stories of everyday people whose lives shaped history. And tonight he's going to be speaking on one of them from the Civil War era, George Gould, and he's going to be resurrecting his lost voice of George Gould in the Civil War. So we're glad to have you, Stan, and you can take it away and lead us on a journey.
Well, thanks for the warm welcome. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate being invited to this. I consider it a great honor. I was also very honored by the spotlight I got in your regimental bulletin. I thought it was very cool, very well done. And I love doing these things because, if you're into history, of course, you have that enthusiasm about it, right? So anyway, before I get into the slideshow, uh, just to repeat, my name is Stan Prager. I own a computer services company. I live outside of Springfield, Mass, Western Massachusetts. I'm also an independent historian who's been studying the Civil War for many years. And this evening, I want to share with you a special project it's an ongoing project I'm working on for nearly a decade, and it's called Resurrecting Lost Voices. Um, and before I start, I just want to say that, unlike a lot of people, I'm not really interested in the left flank, right flank, Civil War battle stuff, and I'm not really interested in a lot of the leaders of the war. I mean, of course, we read about all this, we visit the battlefields, but I'm more interested in the ordinary soldier who went and fought it because, the 650,000 of them that died, they're the people who gave their lives. And so to me, they're the most fascinating. So if I can figure out how to open the PowerPoint, which is always a challenge, then I will we'll talk about this, and I'll give you some visuals, which you have to look at my face. You can look at the presentation, and then I'm going to carve out some time at the end so that we can actually talk about questions and what have you that you might have. So let's see if I can get this up and running. And hey, there it is. Amazing. Okay. So let's see if we can get the, okay. All right, here we go. Resurrecting Lost Voices, the George W. Gould story, do-it-yourself digital archiving. And by the way, I'm not going to be able to talk a lot about the DIY digital archiving tonight because there's only so much time, but it's kind of fun, and that's been as was mentioned in the intro. I'm really interested in the marriage of history and technology. So I own a technology company, and I'm an independent historian. So I'm always looking for ways that we can merge those two interests, and this is part of it. So. The opening slide has this website, Resurrecting Lost Voices. It's also in the regimental bulletin, I believe, that was sent out. This is where the letters are. So the things I'm talking about here tonight, if you guys are interested in it all, I encourage you to go to the website because there's a lot more there than I can cover during this period of time. And there's also another website I created which forwards to this called Adopt a Soldier's Grave. And that's kind of also a side project of mine, trying to get other people to do what I did here with this soldier and adopt the grave and take care of it to some degree because there's a lot of, these people's relatives have died off many, many years ago, and most of them don't get any visitors. Nobody pays attention to their grave. So the art you see on the screen here is Camp Oliver at New Bern, North Carolina, for those who might be interested at that. Okay. Um, Several times a year, I drive an hour and a half to Paxton, Mass, which is near, for those who know Mass, on the way to Worcester, Central Mass, to add another U.S. flag. And in December, I do Wreaths Across America to the grave of George W. Gould. He was an ordinary Union private from Massachusetts who died at Cole Harbor on June 3rd, 1864, to save the Union and forever end human chattel slavery in America. To me, there's a real emotional connection to this, even though I've never met this guy and I'm not related to him, is because when you think about it, for those of you who are fans of the Civil War, there's a United States today because of the sacrifice of Private Gould and hundreds of thousands of others during that rebellion more than 150 years ago. So I salute his grave, I honor his service. There's been many American heroes, but I honor this one specifically through these web pages and through my gravesite visits. So long after he's been dead and otherwise forgotten, his sacrifice, his voice is again resurrected for our time. So it's specific to him, but it's also symbolic for everybody, for every soldier who gave everything in the cause of freedom in all of our various wars. And of course, for all of us, the Civil War is the critical one we're going to talk about. Um, and as I said, you can do something symbolically yourself. You can find a grave of a soldier. It doesn't have to be the Civil War, but if you're a Civil War person like we all are, that might be your first stop. Just a grave that is normally neglected, and pick it and take care of it. It's a great way to kind of honor all of them, in my view. So here's the grave. There it is on the left when I put flags on it, and it's a really old cemetery. So the flags tend to stay there for a long time. And there is flags from previous visits there. And then you'll see on the right, I just recently, this is not from this year, but I recently drove there and put a wreath there. So for those of you familiar with wreaths across America, it's a great thing. But rather than just buying a wreath online and having it go whatever, I actually buy one locally and drive it and put it on his grave. So it's part of honoring the whole process of it. Here's a close-up of the inscription. George W. Gould, killed in battle at Cold Harbor, Virginia, June 3rd, 1861. You'll notice his wife died while he was deployed at 26, which is part of the tragedy of this whole story. There's a little laminated tag that I created. So whenever I put a flag on the grave or a wreath, I put this laminated tag on there. And it, just tells you basically it's a summary of who he is. So, one of the cool things is I'm one of these people that loves to wander graveyards and look at stuff, and you have to, you wonder in your mind who this person was. So this actually gives information about George W. Gould, who he was, Company F, 25th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, where he fell, the fact that he had 3 kids that were left as orphans, and there's a link to the website. So if somebody who sees this, if it piques their interest, they're going to go to the website and look at it. And I can actually tell by web traffic. And shortly after putting flags on the grave or wreaths on the grave, I'll see a lot of web traffic here. I don't know who these people are, but they're looking at it. Incidentally, since then I have created a revised little laminated tag like this, and it has a QR code on it, so that they can just scan it. If anyone here doesn't know what to do with the QR code, just ask any 13-year-old in your orbit, and he'll tell you. He'll explain to you how to use it. All right, so that's a screenshot of the website. And again, I encourage you to go to the website if this is of any interest to you at all, and it may not be, but if it is, the website really is going to have the bulk of the materials that I'm going to talk about tonight, and you can kind of take a deep dive in it. All the letters that he wrote that we have before he was killed are on the website. And that's, was my project with this, was taking these letters and digitally creating digital images of them as well as transcribing them so people could read them. As I said, there's a link in your regimental bulletin for it. It's resurrectinglostvoices.com. So this project first began when I happened upon a cache of previously unpublished correspondence of this private who was killed at Cold Harbor. And I began by transcribing and digitizing the letters, and then I tracked down the historical figure through online and on-the-ground research, recovering artifacts of his life and finally locating his grave. I created this website to honor him. I adopted his grave, and I visit several times a year to put flags and wreaths on the grave. And again, it's kind of a cool thing because this is someone who has no descendants that I can find, and so I feel like I'm the person honoring him. And it makes me feel good, but I've also learned a lot. And for those of you, if you're sitting in on this, obviously you're interested in Civil War history, and it's really cool to learn a lot about something that hasn't been explored before. And, once again, if you're interested in the average soldier, which I am, there's a lot of material out there that nobody's written about. I mean, there's, hundreds of books about Lincoln, and there's so many books about Grant, and so many books about the Emancipation, and so many books about everything else. But a lot of the average soldiers, you're not going to get a lot of material on. Unless you take a deep dive into it. The letters are central to the project. Here's one of them. I'm not going to be able to read all the letters to you, or even excerpts from all the letters, and that you'll probably be glad to hear that, because it would be a better experience if you read them yourself. But since the letters are so central to this, I am going to read you some excerpts so you get a sense of who this guy was, who died so many years ago. So here's a letter that he wrote to his mother. Okay. And you'll notice on the right is the actual scan of what the letter looked like, and then the transcription excerpts in the center of the slide. So he says, "Dear Mother, I received your letter the 23rd and was very glad to hear from you and to hear that you're all well. But Father, I'm sorry to hear that he's sick, but it's the common lot of man here below. And I think the more we suffer in sickness and affliction will better fit us for that world to which we are all hastening if we only make the right use of it. Life is short at the longest, and we ought so to live so as to be prepared for death at any time. For we know not what a day may bring forth. We are admonished of the uncertainty of life every day. One after another of our friends pass away, and their places were left vacant, never more to be filled on earth." I mean, one of the things that I got from reading this originally, and from reading a lot of other soldiers' letters, is how literate these guys were. And this is more true probably of people from New England than maybe the Deep South, but overall, most of these people could read and write pretty well. Notice he doesn't do very well with punctuation, but that's okay. He can write very well, and some of the thoughts here I think are pretty articulate. And this is not just superficial stuff. In New England, you guys probably know a lot of this is because of the emphasis on the Protestant religion and the importance of being able to read the Bible. So just about everybody was literate. This guy was a day laborer. He was not an educated person. So I'm impressed by the fact that even though his punctuation is poor and the sentences are run on and what have you, he is communicating to us some pretty deep feelings that he's having, and he's doing it fairly articulately. And most of his spelling's pretty good. Here and there it isn't, but anyway, I'm pretty impressed by it from that. So here's a short bio of George W. Gould, and I think what's most important with any of these guys isn't like what the specificity. I can't say specificity. I try, but the specific nature of the guy's life is less important than how he represents the average soldier. But he was a private from Leicester, Mass. It's a small town in Massachusetts, in central Mass, and he joined the 25th. He was killed at the Battle of Cold Harbor. And you guys are Civil War guys, so you know that was just a really bloody endeavor. It was a real mess. It was part of Grant's push, and a lot of lives were lost there. But Grant kept going afterwards, something other generals didn't do, and we eventually won. But I got a hold of these letters because I was an intern. I was working on a different project, an entirely different project, and at the Springfield History Museum. And I was scanning the letters at the time of the 31st Mass Infantry, which is the group that went to New Orleans with General Butler. And there was no regimental history of them because their regimental historian suddenly died in 1910 or 11. And the letters were in a box somewhere, and it got rediscovered. So we got a grant, and I was brought on to transcribe and digitize the letters. So we created a website. And in the course of that, I met this young lady there who was a grad student, who also worked at the Staples that I visited all the time because I'm a business owner, so I was always buying paper and stuff. And I ran into Morgan, and she had an uncle who was an antique dealer. And in the drawer of some antique that he got, he found these letters. So she asked me if I wanted to borrow and scan them. And of course, I was thrilled. And I did. I borrowed, I scanned them, and I didn't really think anything of them. I didn't read them right away. I just quickly did it and then returned them to her. A little bit more detail on George W. Gould. I'm not going to go through every aspect of this, but he's 29 years old. He's a laborer. He's said to be 5 foot 5.5 inches tall, somewhat shorter than the average height of a Civil War soldier, which was, I believe, 5'8". But, at the time, that was not super short. He had light brown hair, he had blue eyes, and a light complexion. I don't have any pictures of him. I'm going to keep hunting maybe one day. On July 10th, 1862, he was paid a $125 bounty, and he joined to go away. Now, this was a huge amount of money back then. And I looked this up when in the course of my research. Laborers then, which he was a laborer, were paid an average of $1 a day. So $125, that's a lot of money for a guy who's with a wife and 3 kids, who's a day laborer. And he enlisted as a private in Company F of the Massachusetts 25th to fight for the Union. And he left his young wife, Mira, and their three young children, Ada, Cora, and Clara Etta, at home. His wife died of typhoid fever while he was deployed. He came home on furlough when he reenlisted in January 1864, and then he returned to the front lines where he was part of the Grant's Overland campaign and lost his life in a fierce fighting at Cold Harbor. And again, everyone who knows anything about Cold Harbor knows what a terrible experience that was for anybody there. The 25th was suffered more casualties than any other group, which is pretty terrible. But he was one of the people who died there. I want to share a little personal story about this because, like I said, I scanned these letters, but I didn't really read them. I scanned them, I put them aside. I figured I'd sit down with my iPad at some point and I'd read them when I had time. But in 2016, after I scanned the letters, before I read them, I was visiting my son in college in North Carolina. He went to ECU at the time, and I took a side trip to visit the site of the New Bern battlefield. Which always made my family incredibly unhappy because I would drag them along to all these Civil War. Wherever I went, I had to find a Civil War site. Made them nuts, but they went along with me and they humored me. And apparently George W. Gould initially was stationed at Camp Oliver in New Bern, which was right where I went to the battlefield. That's where Camp Oliver was, and they had the oldest extant trenches in that area. They didn't have a lot of them, but they had some trenches, so I thought it was pretty cool. And then I didn't know anything else about it till I came home. And I read these scanned letters for the first time. And after I read them all and learned that he was killed at Cold Harbor, I got really choked up, I remember. And, I remember there having tears in my eyes. And, I largely because of the connection of having just been to New Bern and just been to where Camp Oliver had been. This is where this guy walked the earth, this is the spot where he walked the earth, somewhere in this vicinity. And then I read this and, finding out that he died. So I decided, all right, I'm going to take these letters, the handful of letters that I have, and I'm going to do something with them. I'm going to transcribe them. I'm going to create a website to honor this guy, and then I'm going to try to learn more about him. So, like I said, we don't have time to go through all the letters or even excerpts, but I want to give you a sense of some of them. So here's a letter from George Gould to his mom in May of 1863. He's still at New Bern. Dear Mother, there's not much news stirring here. Now just everything is quiet in this department, though there are stirring times in the Army of the Potomac. I do wish this thing was played out, but I don't see it as any nearer to an end than it was a year ago. But I ain't got but 17 months longer to stay. So if you see my time is most out. And then here George talks about the draft riots and expresses outrage at the lack of patriotism. I chose this because I thought this was a pretty interesting letter to share here. As you guys, I'm sure, all know, after Gettysburg, those soldiers who were all battle bloodied from that, their first mission after that was sent to New York to quell the draft riots. And George, as you can just imagine, a frontline guy, is pretty upset to hear about this. So he writes this letter to his mother. Dear Mother, I see by the papers that they've had some pretty bloody work at the North on account of this draft. I'm sorry to see that there isn't patriotism enough there to help sustain the Union. I should have thought that the late victories would have sent a thrill of joy to the hearts of the people there, and they would have been willing to turn out to a man and help to close up this war. But there's too many copperheads there for that. I see it's just the worst time they could take to rise if they'd been when our side was being defeated. I should have not thought strange of it, but we must take things as they come. But they may as well yield, for they will have to the government of the United States has got to be sustained. And the time has come when we got a government, or else there's not halfway work about it. Every man that refuses to do it at this time is a traitor to his country and ought to be branded as such. Now, one of the reasons I find this interesting has nothing to do with George Gould himself, is for a long time, there was this argument that soldiers in the Civil War, North and South, they didn't really fight for any cause. They fought for whatever. They fought because their friends fought. They fought because they wanted a bounty. They fought because, their wives or girlfriends would think poorly of them, whatever. There's all kinds of theories about this. And a lot of that's been debunked recently by reading these letters of the average guy. The same thing was said about soldiers from the Confederacy. They weren't really fighting for slavery. Most of them didn't have slaves. Well, if you read a lot of their letters, they mention slavery a lot. I mean, there's camp slaves throughout the war. There's thousands of camp slaves go along with the armies. Lee at Gettysburg had between 6,000 and 10,000 camp slaves. And if you read their letters, they're right in it. They mention slavery a lot. They may not own slaves, but they know what they're fighting for. It's not some abstract, intangible thing. And it's the same thing for these Union troops. Maybe not all of them, But you read this guy's letter. I mean, again, he's just an average private, right? He got paid a bounty because he needed the money to take care of his family. He's out here, but he's really stirred up about this. He cares about the union. He's very patriotic. He isn't just there because he's there. And I think it's a point I want you guys to remember after this talk, because to me, this is central to it. Don't ever believe this nonsense that they didn't care about what they were fighting for. It's just not true. Here's a really sad letter. Here's another one. I'm not one to weep generally, but this one really choked me up. This is where he talks about his wife Mira's death. You know, she's only 26 and he's away. And imagine you're, you know, really far away from home and you haven't seen your wife in a long time and you get this letter that she's dead. Dear mother, you have probably received my letter informing you of the death of Mira. She was taken sick the 27th of August and died on the 23rd of September. She was taken very violently at first and did not sit up any after the first day. Her mother was with her all the time, and they wrote me that she seemed reconciled to the will of God and expressed her willingness to die if it was his will. It is now about 3 weeks since she died, and I can't realize that I shall see her no more. But if I should live to get home and see the vacant chair and the 3 little motherless children, I shall then realize my great loss. Now, I mean, there's poetry in that. Again, this is not an educated dude. And yet he writes this thing enough to choke me up, you know, 150 or 160 years later. I mean, it's very, very moving, and it really brings home what's going on. You can also tell from here he's a very religious guy. He definitely was committed to Christ, and that's part of what stirs him here. He doesn't really write about. He doesn't criticize the other men like some people who are very religious. They criticize other men for drinking or gambling or chasing the women who visit the camps, but he doesn't do that. But he does, he doesn't condemn any of the other soldiers, but he does speak from his heart about his own religious convictions. Here is a letter where he talks about re-enlisting. He writes to his sister. We don't really know why he re-enlisted. I think probably, a re-signing bonus had something to do with it, especially since Mira was dead. But he says, I received your letter yesterday, was glad to hear from you once more, but I'm sorry to hear that mother's still sick, and my health is good now. I've re-enlisted for the term of 3 years longer, unless sooner discharged, and expect to start for home tomorrow or the next day. This was one of the things you may or may not know this, but if they agreed to re-enlist, they got a furlough. They were able to go home. So he'd been with the Army of the Potomac, with the 25th. He was been gone for a long time. Now he gets to go home. He's not going to see his wife, obviously, because unfortunately she's dead. But he'll get to see his 3 little girls, who are staying with Mira's mother, who George doesn't particularly care for, but she's taking care of them for right now. So he does get to see them, and he gets to see his parents, who he's very close to, and his sister. So, please excuse haste. Tell mother she must make haste and get well by the time I get home. But I must close, hoping that this will find you all much better. I remain your affectionate brother. So this is February 8th, 1864, all right? Just to give you time frame, all right? This is George's last letter home. And it's also very poignant. And again, you can tell how articulate this guy is, this private day laborer who probably made $1 a day in this letter. Dear mother, I've been in 3 engagements where the shots and shells blew pretty fast. We've lost quite a number in killed and wounded. There have been 2 killed and a number wounded in our company. When I look forward to the future and think where this will all end, it looks dark and gloomy, and God only knows whether my life will be spared to ever return. And I sometimes think I've seen my children for the last time on earth. And you all but remember that there is a better land above where I hope to meet you all. It seems hard to leave my little ones to the cold charities of the world, but I trust God will raise up friends that will protect them, and in that belief I commend them to the care of the Almighty God and resign myself to his will. So it's as if he has already foreseen his future or lack thereof. He seems to foresee his fate, and this is May 15th, 1864. So this is just a few weeks before his death. And then I read this letter, which I told you got me really choked up after reading all the other letters. This is a letter to his mom from the commissary sergeant after the battle at Cold Harbor, where he was killed. Dear Mrs. Gould, I have sad news for you. Your son, George W. Gould, was killed and left on the battlefield during a furious charge on a rebel work yesterday morning. We were repulsed, and it was impossible to bring his body off of the field. The enclosed diary was in his breast pocket, and it tells where the ball hit him. He was a good soldier, always doing his duty. You have the consolation that he was a Christian soldier, too, and has only gone before. The diary was taken from his pocket by Sergeant Spaulding of Company F. Yours with the Brother Soldiers Sympathy. So we know that he was alive after he was shot, which is pretty horrible when you think about it. Think about Civil War wounded laying on the battlefield. As you probably know, there's a lot of pictures where they're seeing the dead bodies. They're seeing with their jackets pulled up, their coats pulled up, and their bellies are naked. And that's because they look to see where they've been shot, and they know that if they've been gut shot, they're going to die because there was no surgery for that. There was generally no cure, and 99% of those shot in the gut died. There were some who survived, strangely enough, but most of them died. So he actually writes in his diary where he's hit. I would love to have this diary. I would love to have this, but we have to very wonder how long he suffered. Like he could have laid there for hours before he died. It took a long time before they were able to even get to the wounded. So we don't know. We can only hope that it wasn't ours, but we just really don't know. And again, I'd love to get the diary, and I'd love to track down this Sergeant Spaulding and find out from his family. We just don't know because I only have a handful of his letters, so we don't even know, a lot of everything else about George W. Gould because we don't have a lot of the letters. All right, so now that I've transcribed the letters and I post them to the website, I decided to do some deeper research. So I want to spend the rest of the time here today just kind of talking about the rest of the time in this talk, talking about how I got to this point and what I did. And a lot of this stuff you guys may be familiar with. If you're not, there's a lot of material out there, a lot of tools you can use in order to find out information about Civil War soldiers. I use all the typical ones: Ancestry, Fold3, newspapers. Locating the grave turned out remarkably simple with an online resource from Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. It told me exactly where it was. So I got in my car and I drove there, and there it is. The stone next to his daughter Ada, who died of typhoid in an orphanage at only 17 years old. Mira died of typhoid fever also, so it's kind of sadly ironic. Also sad is that after his death, Mira's mother gave up all the children, and one of them got adopted by somebody else, and Ada ended up in an orphanage. The two others survived. None of them have children, so we don't have any descendants, any direct descendants of George, but that's Ada's grave there. And then my next mission was to locate any records of George W. Gould. And look at this. Now, I was really impressed to find this. Who expects to find this kind of thing, right? So, amazingly preserved marble memorial tablet to the honored dead, including George W. Gould, in the town hall at Leicester, where he was housed. And the heading on the plaque says, "When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, 'What mean ye by these stones?' then ye shall answer them, 'When treason raised his hand to destroy the government, these men gave their lives that their union might be maintained, with justice to all.'" Which, by the way, when people today will tell you that, it's wrong to call the Confederates traitors, and that's us looking back, that's bull. The people in the Union considered them traitors at the time. So that's not something that we made up. It's not us putting our contemporary values on them. They considered them traitors at the time, and they were far less forgiving than some people later became. But anyway, I found this. I found this here, and this was incredible. I could not believe that I could locate this, and there it is. So here's a close-up of his name on the plaque, which was very, very cool. And then apparently, the plaque was originally housed in the old town hall, and there's a picture of it, which burned down in 1937. And the only thing they saved, so it was a GAR. You guys are familiar with the fact that there were GAR halls everywhere. This is GAR Post 131, where the plaque was displayed. And it survived the fire. Everything else burned down, but I guess some guys ran in there, grabbed the plaque. I mean, this thing's pretty heavy. I don't know how many guys it took. Probably 10 or 12 people to carry that thing out, but that survived. Of course, we have to wonder what else was lost, right? I mean, imagine what other records might have been in here. For us history people, it's just, it's like the Library of Alexandria, right? It's like, oh my God, what did we lose? But we don't know. So anyway, it survived the fire. They relocated to that building where I showed you the first picture, and we went from there. So my next mission was to clean the grave. The grave was, like most old graves, it was you were starting to get to the point where it was going to be difficult to read the inscriptions. There was a lot of lichen on it, a lot of mold. So I purchased a professional conservation kit. I studied up a bit. And by the way, today is so wonderful. 20 years ago or 25 years ago, you wouldn't have these resources, but there's a YouTube video on everything, right? So I found multiple YouTube videos on how to safely, archivally clean a grave without damaging it. So I did that. So I spent an hour and a half cleaning and scrubbing the stone on a nice summer day, and that's the result. The before and the after, and that's not even completely finished. That's kind of on the way. Here's the final project. Pretty amazing. Unfortunately, 6 years later, it doesn't look that way anymore, and I'm going to have to go back and clean it again. But if you look at it juxtaposed next to Ada's grave, it's pretty dramatic. So my plan is, and I'm kind of a busy guy, and if you heard all the stuff that I do early on, I don't have a lot of spare time, but I do want to get back here one day, clean his grave again, and then I'd like to clean Ada's grave. It's got a lot of detail in it, and I think that because of that detail, it's going to take me a lot longer to do it right and safely, but I want to do it, and I kind of feel like I owe it to George, because it was his daughter. So the latest and final artifact featured on my website is one of the regimental flags for the 25th. In 2021, through the courtesy of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts State House Art Commission, I was extremely fortunate to obtain permission to share the rare color slide of this flag. It was presented by the ladies of Worcester in March 1864, just months before Private George W. Gould sacrificed his life at Cold Harbor. The flag's beautiful if it's in particularly fragmentary condition. I'm thrilled to add this additional element. These flags, by the way, I don't know what it's like in New Jersey, but in Massachusetts, all these flags are rolled up in a repository. They were photographed before they were rolled up. They do not ever unroll them, because if they did, they'd probably fall apart. So it's very difficult to, depending on the quality of the photos that were originally taken, it's sometimes difficult to get a good view of these things. But I was really lucky to get this one. And even though there's fragments, it still looks pretty good. So I thought that was a pretty cool thing to add. I'm always looking for new stuff. As you might gather from my conversation here, the research has not stopped. I'm continuing to go with it. So it's an ongoing project. It's been 10 years. It'll probably be 10 more years if I'm still around 10 years from now. So who is George W. Gould? He's 31 when he was killed. We talked about Cold Harbor. I think all you guys have seen this picture probably of the remains at Cold Harbor. I mean, it was just a brutal experience for the people who were there. But the 25th suffered a staggering, imagine this, a 69% casualty toll. 215 men fell out of 310 on the field, and 74 of those people died, including George W. Gould. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. So not only did he die in battle, but he died in a particularly brutal battle that's very well known. You guys are Civil War people, so you know that 2/3 of the casualties in the Civil War were in hospitals. Farm boys got together and they spread measles. And measles was the biggest killer of the Civil War. Only 1/3 of them were killed in battle. He was one of the ones killed in battle. He was one of the thirds. This is a slide that tells you about what happened to the family. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because all this is on the website. So for those of you who are interested, you can get all that. But Ada, as I said, died at 17. She's buried there. Cora was raised by the executor of her father's will and his estate, George Bond. And she got married later. She was married and her husband died. And then her second marriage was to, this is very unusual, James McKinstry. He was a fellow soldier of her dad, who appears to have served in the Mass 25th along with her father. This wasn't as unusual in the past. Maybe she married him for his pension. A lot of people married Civil War soldiers for their pension, North and South. Maybe she married him because, he reminded her of her dad, even though she, probably didn't remember her dad very well, but, he was a fellow soldier. Maybe she was in love with him. We don't really know, of course, but she died really young at 38 years old. And I found her grave as well. That's not featured here. And then I had a really hard time finding Clara Etta Gould. She lived the longest, She lived to be 62. She married a guy and died as widow. Again, none of these people had descendants, so there were no children. So I felt I was doing even more good work by resurrecting George W. Gould's voice because there was nobody else to do it besides me. Um, Here's a little bit about me, and I'm not going to leave this on the screen very long at all because this isn't about me. Who cares about me? But it does give you my background. Some of that's in your wonderful regimental bulletin. I do a lot of stuff. I'm interested in a lot of stuff. Have a lot of eclectic interests. This is just one of them. Another thing, if you guys are interested in Civil War books, I have a book blog, regarp.com, that's on the slide here. I don't just do Civil War books, but I have a lot of Civil War books reviewed there. I've been to the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg for several years, and I've met authors there, and I've got a lot of their books, and I've reviewed them. So if that's of any interest, and then I'm hoping that this inspires you to look more into the average soldier's life rather than just the generals and battles and stuff like that. And I hope it also inspires you to perhaps adopt a soldier's grave, because that would be like the greatest thing that you could do. So let me disable slide share, and then I'll take questions. And I hope I haven't bored you guys with this, but this is something that really excites me. So I hope some of it excited you as well.